The birthday candles flickered as the words sliced through the celebration. "Don't embarrass me. Just sit there and stay quiet." Laughter turned awkward, the table tense, as her family watched humiliation unfold in front of strangers. Her chest tightened, her voice locked in silence, until a question rang out from across the room. All eyes shifted to her, waiting, and when she finally lifted her head, what she said shattered every mask at the table. "Tell me where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more family dramas." The house was silent, but not the silence of peace. It was the suffocating quiet that follows a storm, thick, heavy, expectant. Behind a locked door, in a small room with peeling wallpaper and a single cracked window, a little girl struggled for air. Her thin chest rose and fell with painful urgency. Dust clung to the air like a choking veil, stirred up from the old blanket she had been forced to lie on. She clawed at her throat, gasping, "Please!" Emma's voice was hoarse, almost gone. "Please, I can't breathe." But her stepmother's sharp reply cut through from the hallway. "Be quiet, Emma. Cry all you want. It won't change anything. This is what happens when you disobey me." The lock on the outside of the door clicked, sealing Emma into her tiny prison once again. The stepmother's footsteps retreated, her heels striking the wooden floor like a hammer pounding in the child's ears. Emma curled into herself, her small body shaking with both fear and fury. She was only 8 years old, but she already knew cruelty in its purest form, the kind that comes not from strangers, but from the person meant to protect you. The little girl pressed her face against the floorboards, hoping for air through the cracks, but the stale smell of mildew made her gag. Her lungs ached, her lips trembled. She cried again, louder this time, desperation tearing through her thin voice. "I can't breathe. Somebody please help me." Her words echoed into the night like a prayer no one would hear. Outside on the empty street, a man stood alone beneath the dim glow of a flickering lamppost. His name was James Harrington, a man known in whispers as the town's hidden millionaire. He was not one for company, not one for gossip, and certainly not one for wandering neighborhoods like this. But tonight was different. Tonight, something had drawn him here. Perhaps fate, perhaps guilt, perhaps the invisible thread of destiny that ties one soul to another. As he lit a cigarette with a trembling hand, James froze. Through the still air came a cry. A child's cry, not the playful whine of bedtime reluctance, not the tantrum of spoiled youth. No, this was raw, primal, terrified. "I can't breathe." The cigarette fell from his hand, the ember dying instantly against the pavement. He turned sharply toward the house, a modest 2-story structure that sagged under years of neglect. Its windows were dark, its front steps broken. But behind one of those walls, someone was suffering. His chest tightened with something he hadn't felt in years, anger that burned like fire beneath his ribs. James strode across the street, his polished shoes crunching against the gravel. His past had taught him to mind his own business, to keep his wealth and his troubles separate from the misery of others. But this was different. Something in that little girl's scream pierced through the armor he had built around himself for decades. At the door, he pounded with a fist. "Open up!" he barked, his deep voice vibrating through the panels. Silence. He hit again, harder. "Do you hear me? Open this door!" From inside, Emma's stepmother hissed in fury. She hadn't expected anyone to hear. She stormed to the front hall, her thin lips curling into a false smile as she cracked open the door. A harsh light spilled across her pinched face. "What's the meaning of this?" she demanded. "Do you know what time it is?" James's eyes narrowed. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of presence that made people shift uneasily without knowing why. He leaned forward, his voice low and steady. "I heard a child screaming," he said. "Where is she?" The stepmother laughed too quickly. "A child? You must be mistaken. My daughter's fast asleep. You're trespassing." But James wasn't a man easily dismissed. He stepped closer, towering over her. The scent of alcohol clung to her breath, her eyes darting nervously toward the locked door down the hall. He caught it instantly. He always noticed the details, the tells of liars, the tremors of guilty souls. And then it came again. "Help me! Please, I can't breathe!" The muffled scream rose from behind the closed door. This time, it was unmistakable. James's jaw tightened. He shoved the stepmother aside with a force that sent her stumbling into the wall. She cursed, spitting venom, but he didn't stop. His heavy steps shook the floorboards as he marched toward the locked door at the end of the hall. Emma's cries grew louder, frantic, as if her small body recognized salvation on the other side. "Emma," he said firmly, pressing his palm against the wood. "I'm here. Hold on." The stepmother lunged, clawing at his arm. "Get out of my house. You don't belong here." Her voice was shrill, desperate now. She knew she was losing control. James turned, his eyes like steel. "And you don't belong near a child." With that, he raised his foot and slammed it against the door. The wood cracked. The second kick splintered it further. On the third, the frame gave way entirely, exploding into shards. Dust and darkness spilled from the room. Emma's small figure was curled in the corner, her face streaked with tears, her lips blue from lack of air. She looked up at him with terrified eyes, unsure if this man was her savior or another monster. James dropped to one knee, his voice softening. "You're safe now, little one. I swear it." Behind him, the stepmother's shriek pierced the air, a promise of coming war. "You'll regret this, Harrington. You'll regret ever stepping into my house." The shattered doorframe groaned as James pulled Emma into the hallway. She clung to his coat, her fragile arms trembling, her breath shallow and uneven. Her thin fingers dug into the fabric as if she feared he might vanish, the way dreams do upon waking. The air smelled of dust, mildew, and something sour, an atmosphere of neglect that wrapped around the house like a curse. The stepmother's voice rose above the silence, jagged with rage. "Put her down! She's mine!" She lunged forward, her bony hands outstretched, but James turned on her, his face dark with fury. "She's not a possession," he thundered. "She's a child." For the first time, the stepmother faltered. James's voice carried a weight that silenced rooms, a tone sharpened by years of commanding boardrooms and bending men of influence to his will. His presence filled the hallway, and for a brief moment, she shrank back. Emma buried her face against his chest, whimpering. He adjusted his stance, wrapping one protective arm around her. "It's all right, Emma. I've got you now." His words were calm, but his eyes blazed with fire as they locked on the woman before him. The stepmother crossed her arms, masking her fear with venom. "You think you can just walk into my house, break my door? Do you have any idea who I am?" James stepped closer, towering over her. "Do you have any idea who I am?" The room seemed to still, the very air pausing between them. Her eyes flickered, recognition dawning. James Harrington was not just any man. He was the reclusive millionaire who lived in the sprawling estate at the edge of town, a man with influence, wealth, and power that stretched far beyond her reach. Her lips curled into a sneer. "So the mighty Harrington is stooped to playing hero? Why? What's she to you? A stray you want to parade around for pity?" James's jaw tightened. He had no intention of explaining himself, not yet. His reasons ran deeper than she could fathom, tied to ghosts of a past he rarely allowed to surface. Instead, he angled his head toward the door she had locked, toward the bruises half hidden beneath Emma's sleeves. "She screamed that she couldn't breathe," James said, his voice low, each word deliberate. "That's all the reason I need." Emma lifted her head, her eyes glassy and filled with both fear and confusion. She didn't understand why a stranger would defend her. No one ever had. The stepmother's laugh was sharp, echoing off the narrow walls. "Children lie. She lies. She always has. You'll regret believing a word she says." James took a slow step forward, his arm tightening around Emma. The floor creaked beneath his weight. "And you'll regret underestimating me." The standoff stretched like a wire pulled taut, ready to snap. Shadows from the dim hallway lamp carved their faces into sharp relief. Her twisted with hate, his hardened with resolve. Emma clung tighter, sensing the storm that hovered between them. Then James spoke again, quieter now, almost like a vow. "She's coming with me." The stepmother gasped, fury sparking in her eyes. "Over my dead body." But James had already turned, shifting Emma in his arms as though she weighed nothing. He moved with purpose, heading toward the front door, but the stepmother darted in front of him, blocking the exit. Her arms spread wide, her voice rising in a shrill wail. "You can't take her! You have no right!" James stopped only inches away, his towering frame casting her in shadow. His eyes burned into hers, his voice a rumble that shook the very air. "If you cared for her, she wouldn't be begging strangers to save her life." Emma's small sobs filled the silence that followed. Her face pressed into his chest as though she wanted to disappear into the safety of his strength. James felt the fragile rise and fall of her breath against him, a weight that pierced deeper than he had expected. The stepmother's sneer faltered into a flash of panic, but she quickly masked it with defiance. "You'll regret this, Harrington. I'll make sure of it." James stepped past her, the splintered door hanging off its hinges as he carried Emma into the cold night air. The street was empty, the lamplight flickering weakly, as though the world itself had drawn back to watch what would unfold. Emma's eyes fluttered shut against his coat, her exhaustion overtaking her fear. James studied her pale face, the bruises on her wrists, the way her breath still came in shallow gasps. He felt something stir inside him, a fury that was not just anger, but a call to action, a demand for justice he could no longer ignore. Behind them, the stepmother's shriek tore through the night like a curse. "You'll regret this! You'll regret it!" James turned his head slightly, his expression carved in stone. "No," he muttered under his breath. "You will." And as he walked toward his car, the street seemed to grow darker, the air heavier, as if even the night understood. The war for Emma's soul had only begun. James froze, the envelope lying in the debris like a relic demanding to be unearthed. For a moment, the night seemed to hold its breath. His hand trembled only slightly as he bent down and picked it up, brushing splinters from its surface. The paper was old, yellowed at the edges, but the handwriting across the front was unmistakable. David Matthews. Emma stirred in the passenger seat of the car, her eyes half open. What is it?" she whispered, her voice fragile, barely there. James closed his fist around the letter, his expression unreadable. "Something your stepmother didn't want anyone to see," he said softly, his words carrying a weight Emma was too young to understand. The front door creaked, and the stepmother appeared on the porch, her silhouette framed by the fractured doorway. Her eyes darted down to the envelope in his hand, and in that instant her mask cracked. Panic flared, sharp and unguarded. "Put that down!" she screeched, her voice ragged. "That's private property!" James slipped the letter into his coat pocket. His stare met hers, steady and unyielding. "You've already stolen enough. This doesn't belong to you." Her face twisted, desperation overtaking rage. "You don't know what you're getting yourself into, Harrington. Walk away while you still can." But James didn't reply. He turned back to Emma, gently shutting the car door so she could rest, then slid into the driver's seat. The engine roared to life, drowning out the woman's curses as the car pulled away from the crumbling house. The road stretched before them, empty and quiet. Streetlights flickered past in fleeting bursts of light. Emma sat curled against the seat, her small hands clutching the fabric of her dress. James glanced at her through the rearview mirror, noting the weariness in her eyes, the way she flinched at every sudden sound. "Emma," he said gently, breaking the silence, "did your father ever talk to you about papers or anything he left behind?" She frowned, her brow furrowing. "Papa? He said he wrote me a letter once, but I never got it." James's grip on the wheel tightened. He had known David Matthews long ago, known him well enough to recognize the man's handwriting the moment he saw it. A wave of memory washed over him, nights of shared laughter, broken promises, and a friendship that had ended in betrayal. Now, here he was, holding a letter that could change everything. Back at the house, the stepmother paced the hallway like a caged animal. Her mind raced, fury colliding with dread. She had hidden that letter for years, buried it beneath boards and locks, swearing no one would ever know. But now Harrington, of all people, had it. Her lips curled in a bitter snarl. "He thinks he's won," she muttered. "He has no idea what I'm capable of." She marched into the kitchen, yanking open drawers, searching. When her hand brushed over a set of hidden documents beneath the cutlery, her chest loosened with grim satisfaction. If Harrington planned to expose her, she would bury him in lies so deep even his fortune couldn't dig him out. At the Harrington estate, James led Emma through the grand foyer. Marble floors gleamed beneath chandeliers, portraits of ancestors lining the walls. It was a place built to intimidate, yet tonight it softened, becoming a sanctuary for a child who had known none. Emma's eyes widened, awe mixing with confusion. Is this your house?" James nodded. "It's our house tonight. You'll be safe here." She shuffled nervously, her small shoes echoing on the polished stone. But what if she comes? James crouched before her, his voice steady and low. She won't. Not here. Not while I'm alive. The words struck Emma like a promise, one she had never heard spoken so fiercely before. A flicker of trust sparked in her eyes, fragile but real. Later, when Emma had fallen asleep in a guest room wrapped in blankets softer than anything she'd ever touched, James sat alone in his study. The firelight flickered across his face as he drew the letter from his pocket. He hesitated, his thumb brushing over David's name. Old guilt stirred within him, the echo of a friendship he had abandoned when pride outweighed loyalty. Finally, he broke the seal. Inside, the pages were filled with David's careful script, words of love to his daughter, instructions for her future, and, James's breath caught, a declaration of inheritance. To my beloved daughter, Emma. All that I own, all that I built, is yours. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise. James set the letter down, his jaw clenched. The stepmother hadn't just been cruel. She had stolen Emma's life, her birthright, everything her father had left for her. The fire crackled, shadows shifting across the walls. James closed his eyes, the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. He had failed David once. He would not fail Emma now. The night pressed heavy around the Harrington estate, its iron gates tall and unyielding against the world beyond. James stood at the study window, his shadow cast long by the fire, watching the stepmother's car idle at the far end of the driveway. The way her headlights glared felt less like light and more like accusation, an unwanted presence clawing at the safety he had promised Emma. His hand slipped into his coat pocket, brushing against the folded letter once again, as if to remind himself of the truth it carried. He could feel the weight of David's words pressing down on him like a judgment. All that I own, all that I built, is yours. It wasn't just a father's farewell. It was a command, a plea for protection, a tether tying James to a girl who had already suffered far too much. Emma's voice echoed from upstairs, a faint murmur in her sleep. She had whimpered once or twice since drifting off, her dreams fractured by memories of the locked room. James's jaw tightened. He knew fear left scars deeper than bruises, and those wounds would not fade easily. Downstairs, the fire cracked loudly, spitting embers. James sat again, unfolding the letter fully, reading by the glow. David Matthews' script was firm, deliberate, the hand of a man who had known both responsibility and urgency. My fortune, my property, my accounts all belong to Emma. Do not let greed or cruelty strip her of what is rightfully hers. To whomever finds this, if Emma cannot yet claim her rights, I beg you, protect her until she can. James exhaled slowly, the ulti words slicing through years of buried guilt. He remembered David clearly, the warmth in his laughter, the stubborn edge in his pride. They had once built dreams together, business ventures, plans that might have changed both their lives. But where David had chosen family, James had chosen ambition. That choice had split them apart, and now only regret remained. Perhaps this was fate's punishment, or its redemption. Headlights blinked out. The engine revved, then cut sharply. When James looked again, the car was gone. The night fell still, but the silence was not reassuring. It was the silence of an enemy regrouping. Morning arrived with muted sunlight spilling across the estate's marble floors. Emma padded softly down the grand staircase, her small form swallowed in a robe that hung too loose around her shoulders. Her eyes, though rimmed with fatigue, held a glimmer of something new, cautious hope. James met her at the base of the stairs with a gentle nod. "Did you sleep?" She shrugged, fiddling with the robe's belt. "Some." The staff had laid breakfast on the long dining table, bowls of fruit, warm bread, fresh eggs. Emma stared at it as if it were a painting too beautiful to touch. "You can eat as much as you want," James said, pulling out a chair for her. "There are no locks here, no rules like hers." Emma's hands trembled as she reached for the bread, almost expecting someone to slap it away. When no blow came, she took a bite, chewing slowly, her eyes filling with tears she tried to hide. James sat across from her, his expression unreadable, though something inside him cracked at the sight of her hesitation. He had walked boardrooms filled with men who would kill for profit, but nothing had ever felt so fragile as watching a child learn how to trust. Later that day, James returned to his study with Emma at his side. He set the letter gently on the desk before her. "This," he said, tapping the envelope, "is from your father." Emma's eyes widened. "From Papa?" Her voice was breathless, her hands hovering above the paper as though afraid it might vanish. "Yes," James replied. "I found it hidden in the wreck of that door. Your stepmother never wanted you to see it." Emma's fingers brushed over the script, tracing her father's name. She swallowed hard, fighting the lump in her throat. She told me, "He didn't leave anything, that he didn't care." "She lied," James said firmly, his voice cutting like steel. "He left everything to you, his money, his property, all of it is yours." Emma gasped, eyes darting up to his. "Mine? Yes. You are his heir, Emma." The words hung in the air, too large for her small frame to hold. For a moment she said nothing, just stared, her lips trembling. Then tears spilled freely, and she clutched the letter to her chest as if it were her father himself. James watched her silently, guilt gnawing at him. He should have been there years ago. He should never have abandoned David or let this child fall into such cruel hands. He vowed silently that from this moment forward, nothing and no one would harm her again. But outside the estate's walls, danger moved swiftly. The stepmother stormed into a lawyer's office, her rage thinly disguised by crocodile tears. She spread documents across the desk, some forged, others stolen, all designed to twist the truth. "He's trying to steal her from me," she hissed. "That Harrington man wants her money, not her safety, and I won't let him." The lawyer frowned, glancing over the papers. "If what you say is true, we can challenge custody, but it won't be easy. Harrington has influence." "I don't care," she spat, slamming her hand on the desk. "I'll destroy him if I have to." Back at the estate, Emma sat on the wide balcony overlooking manicured gardens, the letter still in her lap. James stood nearby, silent, allowing her the space to grieve and to hope. She finally whispered, "Do you think he knows that I got his letter?" James looked at her, the sunlight painting her face in soft gold. "I think he does, Emma, and I think he's proud of you for surviving this long." Her eyes glistened, and for the first time she smiled, a small, fleeting smile, but real. The peace lasted only a moment. A sudden knock thundered at the front doors, sharp and commanding. The butler's startled footsteps echoed down the hall. James and Emma exchanged a glance. The doors swung wide to reveal two uniformed officers, their badges gleaming. Between them stood the stepmother, her lips curled in triumph, papers clutched tightly in her hand. The grand hall of the Harrington estate echoed with the heavy steps of two police officers. Their uniforms gleamed under the chandelier, their expressions grave, while Emma's stepmother stood between them like a queen of venom, her thin smile stretched across her face. The triumph in her eyes was sharp enough to cut glass. "Unlawful entry," one officer repeated, his tone clipped. "And abduction of a minor. Mr. Harrington, we'll need you to come with us." Emma's small fingers gripped James's sleeve so tightly her knuckles whitened. "No," she cried, her voice cracking. "He didn't hurt me. He saved me." The stepmother bent down slightly, feigning pity, her eyes never leaving James. "Now, Emma, darling," she crooned with mock sweetness, "don't let this man confuse you. He's a stranger. He broke into our home. He only wants your money." James's jaw tightened. He stepped forward, his tall frame shadowing Emma protectively. His voice was calm, but each word rang with authority. She was locked in a room. She was screaming for air. "You think that's protection?" One of the officers hesitated, eyes flicking between James and the trembling child clutching his coat. But the stepmother produced the stack of papers from her bag with a dramatic flourish. "Proof," she said, her voice dripping with false conviction. "Legal custody, financial guardianship, everything her late father entrusted to me." She slapped the documents into the officer's hand, her smile twisting further as he flipped through them. James's eyes narrowed. He recognized forged signatures when he saw them. His business dealings had taught him how easily lies could be written on paper. But he also knew the weight of legal appearances, and for the first time in years he felt the sharp sting of helplessness. Emma looked up at him, panic swimming in her eyes. "Please don't let them take me," she whispered, her voice trembling. He bent down, his face close to hers. Emma, listen to me. No matter what happens tonight, I will not let her win. Do you understand? Not now, not ever. Her lip quivered, but she nodded, clutching his hand as if it were the only solid thing in her world. The officers shifted uneasily. Mr. Harrington, we can discuss this at the station. If what you say is true, the courts will settle it. But for now? One reached for James's arm. James pulled back, his voice booming like thunder. You lay a hand on me in my own house, and you will regret it. The room stilled. Even the stepmother flinched at the power in his tone. But James, for all his fury, knew he could not simply defy the law. Not here, not now. He took a slow breath, forcing composure. Fine, he said finally, standing tall. We'll go, but she comes with me. He gestured toward Emma. The stepmother shrieked with laughter. Oh no, Harrington, she's coming home with me, where she belongs. Emma's body shook. She clung harder, shaking her head violently. No, I don't want to go with her. The officers exchanged uncertain glances. The louder Emma protested, the less their certainty held. One officer cleared his throat. Given the situation, the child will remain with protective services until custody is sorted. Neither of you will have her for now. The stepmother's smile cracked, but she quickly smoothed it back into place. That's acceptable, as long as she's not with him. Emma burst into sobs, burying her face against James's chest. James stroked her hair, his voice low enough only for her to hear. Stay strong, little one. This is just the beginning. She thinks she's won, but she hasn't. At the police station, the air smelled of stale coffee and ink. Harsh fluorescent lights hummed overhead. James sat across from a desk piled with reports, the sealed letter from David still tucked securely in his coat pocket. The officers questioned him for hours, his entry into the stepmother's home, his intentions with Emma, his connection to her late father. Through it all, James remained steady, answering with precision, his voice a calm counterweight to the accusations. Meanwhile, in another room, the stepmother painted herself as a saint. I've raised that child since her father died, she said with tearful dramatics. She's troubled, always lying, always seeking attention. Harrington only wants her inheritance. He broke into my house to steal her away. Her words dripped poison, but her eyes gleamed with satisfaction. By midnight, the officers made their decision. Emma would not return to her stepmother, but she would not stay with James either, not yet. The court would decide. For now, she would be placed into temporary care. Emma's cries echoed through the station as she clung to James, refusing to let go. Don't leave me, please! James knelt, his hands firm on her shoulders. Emma, listen to me. This is not the end. Trust me. I have something she doesn't, the truth, and I promise you, I will fight for you with everything I have. Her eyes searched his, wide with fear, but she nodded faintly, clinging to his sleeve until officers gently pulled her away. The stepmother's smirk widened as she watched Emma drag down the hall. She leaned close to James, her whisper sharp as a blade. You're powerful, Harrington, but I've beaten men stronger than you. She's mine, and no letter in the world will change that. James's eyes burned into hers, his voice low and cold. You've stolen from her, lied to her, broken her spirit. But mark my words, you will answer for every bruise, every tear. The war starts now. The courthouse loomed like a monument of stone, its columns reaching toward the gray sky. A cold wind swept through the square, whipping Emma's hair into her face as she clutched James's hand with her small trembling fingers. It was the morning of the first hearing, the day when truth would battle lies before strangers in robes who held the power to decide her fate. James glanced down at her, his expression steady though the storm inside him raged. Remember what I told you, he murmured. No matter what she says, you speak your truth. That's all you owe anyone. Emma nodded faintly, though her eyes darted nervously toward the courthouse steps where her stepmother already stood, flanked by a lawyer in a sharp gray suit. Her smile was painted across her face like a mask, but her eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, never left Emma. Look at her, James said softly, bending toward Emma's ear. She feeds on fear. Don't give her what she wants. Emma squeezed his hand tighter, drawing strength from the weight of his presence. Inside the courthouse, the air was thick with anticipation. Families murmured in the gallery, papers rustled, lawyers whispered among themselves. The judge, a stern man with weary eyes, took his seat. His gavel struck the block with a sharp crack. Case number 4173, the clerk read. Guardianship and estate of Emma Matthews. Emma's name echoed across the chamber like a challenge. The stepmother's lawyer rose first, his voice smooth, confident. Your Honor, my client has been Emma's guardian since her father's untimely passing. She has provided food, shelter, and care. She alone carries the legal responsibility. The man seated opposite, Mr. Harrington, unlawfully entered her home and abducted Emma, endangering her welfare. His motives are suspect, tied not to the child's well-being, but to her sizable inheritance. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Emma's eyes widened, her heart pounding. She turned toward James, panic rising in her chest. But James remained calm, his gaze fixed on the judge. Your Honor, James began, his voice deep and commanding, what the counsel neglects to mention is the condition in which I found this child, locked in a room, bruised, crying out that she could not breathe. I did not abduct her. I rescued her. His words carried weight, but the stepmother was ready. She sprang from her seat, crocodile tears spilling down her cheeks. Lies. She's always been a difficult child. She makes up stories for attention. He's manipulating her. Emma's small voice rose suddenly, trembling but determined. That's not true. All eyes turned toward her. The judge leaned forward. Child, you may speak. Emma's hands shook as she gripped the edge of the table. Her voice cracked but carried through the silence. She locked me in the dark. She said if I cried, no one would hear me. She took Papa's things and told me he didn't love me. But he did. He left me a letter. The courtroom stirred. The stepmother's face blanched, then twisted in fury. She's lying. James reached into his coat pocket. His hand closed around the letter, the very piece of truth that could shatter the woman's lies. Slowly, deliberately, he pulled it out and held it up. This, he said, unfolding it carefully, is David Matthews' last letter to his daughter. It proves not only his love, but his intentions for her inheritance. He entrusted it all to Emma, not to this woman who has spent years robbing her of both dignity and rights. The lawyer's composure cracked. He stammered, demanding to see the document. The judge gestured, and the bailiff carried the letter forward. As it was read aloud, David's words filled the chamber, his instructions for Emma's care, his love etched into every line, his clear declaration that all he owned belonged solely to her. Gasps rose again. The weight of truth pressed heavy across the room. The stepmother's mask shattered. Her voice rose into a shriek. He left me nothing. After all I sacrificed. Her lawyer tried to quiet her, but she shook him off, rage boiling over. You don't understand. I deserved it. I raised her. She owes me. Her outburst silenced the room more effectively than any gavel. The judge's eyes hardened. This court will recess to review the evidence. When we return, a temporary ruling will be issued. The gavel struck, echoing like a gunshot. Outside the courtroom, Emma leaned against James, her body shaking. Do you think they believe me? She whispered. James knelt so he could meet her eyes. The truth has a way of cutting through lies, Emma. They heard your father's words. They heard yours. That's more powerful than anything she can throw at us. But even as he spoke, he saw the stepmother across the hall, her lawyer whispering frantically in her ear. Her eyes met his, filled not with fear, but with something darker. Calculation. She wasn't beaten, not yet. She was planning her next move. That evening, back at the Harrington estate, James tried to focus on strategies for the case, but his mind kept circling back to Emma. She sat curled on the sofa in his study, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, staring into the fire. Do you miss him? James asked quietly, knowing the answer. Emma nodded. Every day. I used to pretend he'd come back, but she told me he hated me. James's throat tightened. He wanted to tell her the truth, that her father had loved her fiercely, that his last words proved it. But he also knew some wounds could not be healed with words alone. You were never hated, he said firmly. You were stolen from. There's a difference, and I will not let her steal another day from you. Emma turned, her eyes brimming with tears. For the first time she believed him. The Harrington estate stood like a fortress of stone and glass, its tall windows reflecting the pale light of dawn. For Emma, it was a world she had never known. Walls that did not threaten to close in, doors that opened without locks, air that did not smell of mold or confinement. Yet, even within this new sanctuary, shadows of her past clung tightly to her heart. On her first full morning there, she awoke not to the clang of a lock or the cold voice of her stepmother, but to the sound of birdsong spilling through an open window. She sat up slowly, rubbing her eyes, unsure if it was real. The sheets beneath her were soft, the air fresh. For a moment she wondered if she had dreamed everything, James, the court, the letter, but when she saw the folded robe neatly placed at the end of her bed, the doubt faded. She slipped into it and wandered barefoot through the wide corridors, her small footsteps echoing softly. Paintings lined the walls, portraits of stern-faced Harrington ancestors, landscapes of estates long gone. To Emma, they felt like silent watchers, keeping her safe. Downstairs, the dining table stretched longer than any she had seen, set with silver cutlery and warm dishes that filled the room with scents of bread, fruit, and honey. James sat at the head, papers spread before him, but when he saw her, he pushed them aside. "Good morning," he said gently. "Did you sleep?" Emma hesitated, then nodded. "Better." "Good." He gestured to the table. "Eat what you like. There's no shortage here." She slid into a chair, her small hands hovering nervously over the food. She picked up a piece of bread, then paused, half expecting someone to slap it from her fingers. When no hand came, she tore off a bite, chewing slowly. Tears welled in her eyes before she could stop them. James pretended not to notice at first, giving her space, but finally he spoke. "No one will take it away from you here, Emma. Not food, not safety, not anything." Her gaze flickered to him, uncertain, but she gave a tiny nod. Later, he led her through the estate's gardens. Roses climbed along stone walls, fountains whispered in the morning air, and marble statues watched over the green lawns. Emma ran her fingers over the petals, her eyes wide, as if she had stumbled into another world. "Do you like it?" James asked, watching her closely. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Then her brow furrowed. "But do I really belong here? It feels like it's not for me, like it's too much." James crouched to her level, his voice steady. "Emma, beauty doesn't belong to wealth. It belongs to anyone who needs it. And you, after everything you've endured, you need it most." Her lips trembled, then curved into a fragile smile. But safety was never more than a fragile illusion. That night, the house felt different. A storm gathered outside, rain lashing against the windows. James sat in his study, reviewing the emergency petition the stepmother had filed, an attempt to strip him of guardianship before it had even been granted. Her accusations were venomous: exploitation, manipulation, greed. Lies inked into paper, designed to corrupt the truth. James rubbed his temples, exhaustion pressing against him. He knew her type: greedy, cunning, relentless. She would not stop until Emma was back under her thumb. A scream shattered the stillness. James bolted from his chair, sprinting down the hall. He burst into Emma's room to find her sitting upright in bed, sobbing, her hands clawing at the blanket. "She was here," Emma cried. I saw her shadow at the window." James rushed to the glass. The rain streaked across it, but beyond the storm, the garden lay empty. Still, he knew Emma's terror was not born of imagination alone. Sometimes nightmares were just memories replaying themselves. Sometimes, though, they were warnings. He sat on the edge of her bed, pulling the blanket around her. "You're safe, Emma. No one can get through these walls." Her tears soaked the fabric of his sleeve as she whispered, "Promise me." He brushed her damp hair from her face. "I promise. No more locked rooms, no more darkness, not while I'm here." The next morning, newspapers arrived at the gates. The headlines were merciless. Wealthy Harrington exploits orphaned heiress. Stepmother claims child manipulated in fight over fortune. James skimmed the lines, his jaw tightening. The smear campaign had begun. His name, once respected even in silence, was now being dragged through the mud. He could survive scandal. He had survived worse. But Emma? She was fragile, tender, barely beginning to trust the world again. Lies like these could break her. Emma wandered into the room, still sleepy, her hair tangled. She caught sight of the paper in his hands. "What does it say?" James folded it quickly, but she had already seen the bold letters. "They think you're bad." He knelt before her, holding her shoulders. "Listen to me, Emma. People will say many things. Lies spread faster than truth. But you know who I am. You know what I've done for you. Don't let their words steal that from you." Her eyes searched his, filled with fear but also with a fragile faith. She nodded slowly. That afternoon, James took her to the balcony overlooking the gardens. He told her stories of her father, David Matthews, of their younger days, of his laughter, of the way he would have wanted Emma to grow in light, not shadows. Emma listened intently, her tears soft this time, not from sorrow but from longing. "He loved me," she whispered. "He really did." "Yes," James said firmly. "He loved you enough to fight for your future. And now it's my turn." Emma leaned against him, her trust deepening. For the first time, she believed she might not be alone in the fight. But far beyond the safety of Harrington's estate, in a small office lit by a single lamp, Emma's stepmother reviewed a new stack of forged documents. Her lips curled into a smile as she whispered to herself, "Let him have his mansion. Let him play savior. When the judge sees these, he won't look like a protector. He'll look like a thief." Her hand hovered over the papers, her pen scratching final touches of false signatures. The courthouse was packed. Word of the case had spread beyond town. Reporters and onlookers crowded the steps, their cameras flashing like lightning. Inside, the atmosphere was suffocating, a storm of whispers and suspicion. James entered with Emma at his side, his hand steady around hers, but even his strong presence couldn't erase the uncertainty gnawing at her. On the opposite side of the chamber, the stepmother was radiant in her false virtue. She wore a black dress, her hair perfectly styled, her expression carefully crafted into one of wounded innocence. Beside her sat a new lawyer, slick, sharp-eyed, the kind of man who thrived on shadows. When the judge called the session to order, the lawyer rose with a confidence that filled the room. "Your Honor, today we present irrefutable proof that Mr. Harrington is exploiting young Emma Matthews for personal and financial gain. The evidence speaks for itself." He laid the stack of documents on the judge's bench with theatrical precision. Forged papers, bank transfers, false agreements, fabricated letters suggesting James had positioned himself to siphon Emma's inheritance. Every page was a lie, but a dangerous one, dressed in the trappings of truth. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Reporters scribbled frantically. The stepmother pressed a hand to her chest, feigning the heartbreak of a guardian betrayed. James remained motionless, his jaw set. He had expected this, but the sheer audacity of her deception was staggering. His fortune was vast, independent of Emma's inheritance. He didn't need a cent of her father's estate, but proving that in the court of law and in the court of public opinion were two very different battles. The judge flipped through the pages, frowning. "These are serious allegations, Mr. Harrington. If substantiated, they could not only remove you from consideration as guardian, but open you to criminal charges." Emma's small voice broke the tension. "No!" she cried, standing abruptly. The courtroom hushed as all eyes turned to her. Her lips trembled, but her eyes blazed with courage. "He's not lying. He doesn't want my money. He wants me safe. He's the only one who's ever wanted me safe." The stepmother's lawyer sneered. "She's a child, Your Honor, easily manipulated. Harrington has filled her head with ideas." James rose slowly, his voice calm but thunderous in its certainty. "Your Honor, these documents are fabrications. Anyone who has investigated my estate knows I have no need of Emma's inheritance. My assets are public record. I welcome a full audit. In fact," he reached into his briefcase, producing his own documents, bound and notarized. "I have already submitted proof of my accounts, proof that I have provided for Emma's care without touching a cent of her father's legacy." The gallery erupted again, voices clashing in whispers of doubt and defense. The judge rapped his gavel. "Enough. This will be decided by evidence, not outbursts." During recess, James sat with Emma in a quiet alcove of the courthouse. She was pale, her hands trembling as she clutched his sleeve. "They believe her," she whispered. "They think you're bad." James took her hands gently in his. "Emma, listen to me. Lies are loud, but truth endures. We will fight this, not with rage, not with fear, but with patience. Do you understand?" Tears brimmed in her eyes. "What if they take me away?" His voice softened, steady as stone. "Then I will fight until you're back. I swear it on your father's name." For the first time, she leaned into him willingly, her small frame pressed against his. "I believe you," she whispered. Meanwhile, in the shadows of the courthouse cafeteria, The stepmother sat across from her lawyer, her mask of innocence slipping into raw venom. "She's supposed to be broken by now," she hissed, "not standing there, defying me. He's turning her against me." Her lawyer leaned in, lowering his voice. "You've underestimated Harrington. His wealth protects him. His influence makes him dangerous." The stepmother's nails dug into her palm until her skin whitened. "Then we'll break her another way. If she won't fear me, she'll fear losing him. Every man has a weakness." Her lawyer's thin smile spread. "And his weakness, it seems, is her." Back at the Harrington estate that night, James stood before the fire in his study, exhaustion weighing heavily on him. The smear campaign in the press was worsening. Headlines painted him as a predator cloaked in wealth. His allies whispered of reputational ruin. His enemies circled like vultures. Yet upstairs, Emma slept more peacefully than she had in months, her trust in him a fragile shield against the world. James stared into the flames, the letter from David Matthews once again in his hands. He read the words slowly, letting them root deeper into his soul. "Protect her. Do not let greed or cruelty strip her of what is rightfully hers." He whispered into the quiet, "I won't fail you this time, David. I won't." The brick still lay on the marble floor, its jagged edges dusted with broken glass. James held the note in his hand, the letters carved with fury, each stroke dripping venom. "She belongs to me. Next time, I take her back." His jaw tightened, the words burning into his mind like a brand. He heard soft footsteps behind him. Emma stood at the top of the staircase, clutching the railing, her eyes wide. "What happened?" she whispered. James quickly folded the note, slipping it into his coat. "Nothing you need to fear," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "Go back to bed, Emma." But she didn't move. "She's not going to stop, is she?" James looked up at her, the weight of her small figure silhouetted against the dim light. "No," he admitted quietly. "She isn't." The following morning, James sat in his study, his hands pressed together in thought. The letter from David Matthews lay open before him. He traced the familiar handwriting, guilt gnawing at him like a wound that never healed. David had once been his closest friend. They had dreamed of building empires together, building futures that would outlast them. But ambition had driven James away. He had chosen wealth over loyalty, leaving David to walk his path alone. When David had married, when Emma was born, James had not even been there. And now David was gone, buried, his voice living only in the ink of a letter meant for a daughter who had been robbed of it for years. James closed his eyes. "I failed you once, old friend. I won't fail her now." Later that afternoon, James led Emma into the conservatory where sunlight streamed through tall glass panes. She sat on a bench, her legs dangling, her hands folded in her lap. Her eyes searched, his face with quiet curiosity. "Why are you helping me?" she asked softly. "You didn't know me before." James knelt in front of her, his voice low, the words heavier than he expected. "Because I knew your father. We were friends once. We built dreams together. And I betrayed him. I let pride ruin what we had. When he needed me most, I wasn't there." Emma's eyes widened. You knew Papa?" James nodded, his throat tightening. "Yes. And I carry the weight of that failure every day. But helping you, it's not just about him. It's about you. You deserve a life free from fear. And I'll give everything I have to make sure you have it." Tears welled in Emma's eyes, but this time they were not from fear. She leaned forward suddenly, wrapping her thin arms around his neck. "Thank you," she whispered, "for not leaving me too." James froze, the embrace striking deeper than any courtroom victory. Slowly, he wrapped his arms around her, his chest tightening with something he had not felt in years. Redemption. That night, James stood once more before the fire, staring at the flames. Emma's words lingered in his ears, the warmth of her small arms still fresh against him. He was no longer fighting just to protect David's daughter. He was fighting for the child who had given him something back, purpose, the chance to atone, perhaps even the chance to become the man David had once believed him to be. But his thoughts were interrupted by the ringing of the study phone. He lifted the receiver, his voice steady. "Harrington." A voice crackled on the line, low and unfamiliar. "Mr. Harrington, you don't know me, but you should know this. She's desperate, your enemy. She's paying people to dig into your past, to twist it, to make the world see you as a monster. If you think she'll stop in court, you're a fool. She'll burn everything to get that child back." The line went dead before James could respond. He set the receiver down slowly, his mind racing. She was already orchestrating his destruction, weaving her lies into nets designed to ensnare not just his reputation, but his very soul. 2 days later, the courtroom was filled again. Emma sat close to James, her small hand hidden within his, her eyes darting nervously. The stepmother strode in with smug confidence, her lawyer carrying another stack of documents. This time, however, James was ready. "Your Honor," he said as the judge entered, his voice calm but carrying, "before we hear any more accusations, I wish to submit new evidence of my connection to David Matthews." The judge raised a brow. "Proceed." James handed the bailiff a folder. Inside were letters, old correspondence between him and David, business records, photographs of their youth together, proof of a friendship that had once been strong, proof of a bond that now tied him irrevocably to Emma. The judge examined them in silence. The gallery murmured. The stepmother's face paled, her confident mask faltering. "This evidence shows that I am not some stranger exploiting Emma," James continued, his eyes blazing. "I'm a man who failed his friend once, but who now carries his promise in full. Emma is not a pawn in a game of inheritance. She is the daughter of a man I loved as a brother, and I will not abandon her again." Emma's eyes filled with tears as she looked up at him, her hand gripping his tighter. The stepmother erupted, her voice sharp with desperation. "Lies! You're spinning stories, Harrington. None of this matters. She's mine. Her father left her with me, and I'll destroy anyone who tries to take her." Her words echoed like venom across the chamber, shocking even her own lawyer. For the first time, her mask cracked in front of the judge. The gavel slammed down. Enough. The room fell silent, the echoes of her outburst still hanging in the air. The courthouse filled before dawn, as if the town itself had come to sit in judgment. Cameras clustered like a second jury under the high dome. Whispers curled through the aisles. Neighbors craned their necks to catch a glimpse of the drama now public property. The stepmother's supporters packed the gallery on one side, faces set in righteous anger. On the other, tentative sympathizers of Emma and Harrington watched with guarded hope. The air tasted metallic with tension. When the judge took his seat, the room quieted into an almost sacred hush. This was more than a custody dispute now. It was a trial of reputations, a contest between light and a determined, pervasive darkness. James sat upright, shoulders squared, the lines around his mouth deeper than the day before. The man who had once fled responsibility now stood like a shield. The stepmother's attorney rose first, his voice smooth as oil. He called witnesses, neighbors who claimed they heard no cries, accountants who testified they had seen drafts suggesting different arrangements, and a social worker whose report had been shaded with the stepmother's rhetoric. Each testimony was a blade meant to slice the narrative James and Emma had offered. The prosecutor's questions landed with practiced cruelty, coaxing doubt to bloom in the judge's eyes. James listened. He took notes, his face unreadable. He had been prepared for legal assaults, but the subtler blows, the whispered insinuations in the press, the slow corrosion of public trust stung more than any lie. Yet for every witness the stepmother paraded, James had a counter. An old contractor who remembered repairing the boarded window in Emma's room, a schoolteacher who hadn't seen the child in months and had received no communication from the woman supposedly caring for her. Slowly, the truth stitched itself into the ragged fabric of the courtroom. Midway through the morning, a witness arrived whom no one expected. Mrs. Caldwell, the elderly neighbor who had lived 2 doors down from Emma's house for decades. Her hands trembled as she took the stand, but she spoke with a clarity that cut through the fog. "I saw her, Judge," she said, voice small but unflinching. "That girl, she wasn't allowed outside like other children. I used to bring leftover soup and she'd whisper to me through the window. One night I heard her screaming, loud enough to wake me. I called the police once, but they left. I thought someone would listen." The courtroom seemed to inhale. The stepmother's face flushed the color of something unwell. Her lawyer shifted uneasily. James felt something loosen inside him, a tiny, private vindication for the nights he had stared at David's letter and vowed not to fail again. Then came the cross-examination of the stepmother herself. She rose, eyes flashing like flint, and recited her story. Years of sacrifice, sleepless nights, the burden of caring for a child after a public tragedy. She spoke of loyalty and obligation, weaving the narrative of a guardian wronged by a wealthy outsider. Her voice was theatrical, and for a beat, the gallery swallowed the script whole. Sympathy leaned toward her like a tide. James watched her with a cool, measured gaze. When his lawyer began to question her, the shell of composure began to fracture. Small inconsistencies, once brushed aside, opened into chasms. Dates shifted. Claims of sole guardianship bent under scrutiny. When asked directly about the hidden letter from David, she stammered, then accused a memory lapse, then snarled. Her only unguarded moments were those of anger, hot, reactive, revealing all the corners she had papered over. In the middle of the second day's proceedings, James rose to the stand. He did not stand as a titan of industry, but as a man hollowed and rebuilt by regret. He told the court about David, not in legalese, but in the blunt truth of friendship and failure. He admitted to walking away from a man who trusted him, to letting ambition eclipse loyalty, and to carrying the guilt across years until it became a responsibility he could no longer ignore. "There are sins you can atone for," he said plainly, "and then there are consequences you cannot escape. I failed David. I failed his daughter when I did nothing. Bringing her here isn't about money, it's about correcting that failure. Would you forgive me for making that mistake once more by standing idle? I chose to act." His words were raw and real, and the courtroom, so accustomed to polished defenses, felt the tremor of honesty. The prosecution tried to pick apart his admission, painting contrition as manipulation, another ploy. Yet, somewhere between the lawyer's clipped questions and James's steady answers, jurors of public opinion shifted. The narrative of a man seeking to redeem himself for a past betrayal carried weight that fabrications could not replicate. Then, after hours of testimony, a new twist. The court clerk called for evidence that had been sealed the previous week, documents James had provided challenging the stepmother's claimed legal authority. The seal broke, and an envelope slid onto the judge's bench. When the bailiff read aloud, the court listened as signatures were compared, and forensics described discrepancy after discrepancy. Handwriting experts, summoned in secret, presented their findings. The stepmother's signature on a purported guardianship document bore signs of forgery. Dates had been altered. A notarization stamp was inconsistent with the issuing office's records. A murmur rose like a wave. The stepmother's lips thinned to a white line. For the first time since this nightmare began, her eyes showed true fear. Emma watched it all, wide-eyed, exhausted, but steady. When the judge asked if she wished to speak again, she rose unassisted. Her voice, though small, filled the chamber. "I don't want to live in a house where I have to ask to breathe," she said simply. "I want to live where someone tells me I'm safe, not someone who takes things from me and says it's for my good. Would you let someone do that to your child?" The question hung in the room, a mirror held up to each listener. The judge's face, usually impassive, betrayed a flicker of something like pity. He closed his notebook, steepled his fingers, and delivered a measured order. "This court has heard sufficient testimony to warrant further examination of the documents presented. We will recess and reconvene after the review." He rapped the gavel. The sound cracked like thunder, yet instead of finality, it offered uneasy suspension. As the courtroom emptied, cameras swallowing departing figures and murmurs trailing like smoke, James bent to Emma and kissed the top of her head. Her spine, small and defiant, rested against his chest. He felt both victory and dread ripple together. Victory because truth had found purchase, dread because the final balance still waited. Outside, reporters shouted questions at anyone who would listen. The stepmother's lawyer whispered threats into her ear. The town divided itself along invisible seams. The war had been fought under lights and laws and witness stands, but one thing remained unspoken and immense. The final decision, when it came, would not only determine Emma's future, it would decide whether a man could truly redeem himself in the eyes of a community that remembers mistakes forever. The courthouse overflowed with people that afternoon. The air inside felt heavy, every bench filled, the gallery buzzing with anticipation. Reporters craned their necks, their pens ready to capture history. Outside, a crowd gathered, waiting to hear what the judge would decree. For Emma, the world had grown impossibly large, every eye staring at her small figure as though her future belonged to them. She sat close to James, her hand gripping his sleeve tightly. He said nothing but his presence spoke louder than any words could. He was here, immovable, a shield against whatever storm came. The judge entered, his robe sweeping across the floor, his face carved into solemn stone. The gavel struck once, silencing the whispers. We reconvene for the matter of guardianship and estate of Emma Matthews. This court has weighed the testimony, reviewed the documents, and considered the child's own words. The gallery leaned forward as one. The judge's voice cut through the silence. It is the judgment of this court that the documents presented by Mrs. Matthews are falsified. This conclusion is supported by forensic analysis and testimony. Therefore, any claim of legal guardianship on her part is invalid. The stepmother jolted to her feet, her voice shrieking across the chamber. Lies! This is a conspiracy! He bought you all! Sit down! The judge thundered, slamming his gavel. Officers moved swiftly to hold her back, her screams clawing against the chamber walls. Emma flinched, tears welling in her eyes. James reached for her hand, steadying her trembling fingers. The judge continued, his voice firm. Furthermore, this court recognizes the legitimacy of the late David Matthews's letter and testament. The inheritance, estate, and guardianship are awarded to his daughter, Emma Matthews. Temporary custody will be transferred immediately to James Harrington, who has demonstrated both responsibility and care for the child. The gavel struck a final time. The verdict was sealed. The courtroom erupted. Gasps, whispers, flashes of cameras. The stepmother fought against the officers restraining her, her voice shrill with venom. She's mine. She owes me everything. You can't take her away. But her cries no longer held power. She was led from the chamber, her hands shaking, her face twisted in rage. For the first time, Emma saw her stepmother for what she truly was, not a figure of fear, but a desperate, broken woman clinging to lies. Emma turned into James's side, her small frame shaking. Is it over? She whispered. James lowered his head, his voice soft. Yes, Emma, it's over. Her tears fell freely, but they were no longer tears of terror. They were tears of release. That evening, back at the Harrington estate, the world outside still buzzed with headlines, but inside, the mansion felt transformed. The walls no longer echoed with shadows, but with a new kind of silence, a peaceful one. Emma sat by the fire in James's study, wrapped in a blanket. The letter from her father lay on her lap, its words no longer hidden, but carried like a treasure. She looked up at James, who sat across from her, his gaze fixed on the flames. Do you think he'd be proud? She asked quietly. James's throat tightened. He nodded slowly. Yes, he'd be proud of your courage, and he'd forgive me for failing him, because I didn't fail you. She smiled faintly, the first unburdened smile he had seen from her. I'm not afraid anymore. He reached across the table, taking her small hand into his. Then, we've already won. Later that night, as Emma drifted into sleep, James stood by the window, staring out at the gardens. For years he had lived alone in a fortress of wealth, haunted by regrets of choices he could not undo. But now there was light inside those walls again, because of a child who had cried out in the dark and reminded him of what truly mattered. He whispered into the quiet, as though David himself might hear. I'll take care of her. I'll do what I should have done long ago. She will never be alone again. The wind rustled through the trees outside, as if carrying the message into the night.